It's safe to say that Ninja Storm 4 is probably one of the best Naruto games. This is mostly due to its large roster, anime-faithful graphics, and its accessible combat system. Ninja Storm 4 is only able to be this good thanks to the improvements made with each sequel. But was the series always this good? Does the original Ninja Storm that came out in 2008 still hold up to modern expectations? The most outdated aspect of the game is how small the roster is, especially compared to Ninja Storm 4, which had over 100 characters. The small roster could be forgiven since this game only covers part 1 of Naruto, but even with that fact, it's still missing important characters like Zabuza and Haku, which also means that the story mode completely skips over the Land of the Waves arc. The Sound 4 also aren't playable, and they won't become playable until Ninja Storm 4, which means when the story mode eventually reaches the Sasuke retrieval arc, all the fights with the Sound 4 members will just be replaced with you fighting Kimimaru several times, and the Sound 4 members will just be support characters. Something that the Storm 1 roster has over the Storm 4 is that awakened characters have their own character slots and their own separate moveset. So if you want to fight a battle as Curse Mark Sasuke from the beginning, you can throughout the entire fight, and he'll have his own entire moveset and ultimate jutsu. This feature was unfortunately cut from the sequels, and the awakened characters now feature limited movesets and can no longer be selected on their own. Something else that I miss in the sequels is that each playable character has at least 2 jutsus, and you can select which one you want to use in the battle in the character select screen. Even support characters have more than 2 jutsus, while in the sequels, support characters only have 1. Even though it's a small feature, these bonuses do help mitigate the small roster by adding variety to the characters. The combat isn't as refined as Ninja Storm 4, it's a lot slower and clunkier, but as the first entry in the series, it lays a good foundation, which can lead to more improvements in the future. The combat itself is very simplistic. Combos are done with the mashing of one button, and you could use the directional analog stick to determine which combo you're using. Other actions such as throwing, using jutsus or ultimate jutsus, and awakenings are only done with the press of a few buttons. Anyone can pick up the controller and be decently proficient at this game, but there's still enough complexity that allows higher skill players to have an advantage over beginners. But despite how good you are at the game, there's some abilities that are so useless that not even the highest skill players would be able to utilize them. One of them is the heavy attack that allows you to maintain distance from your opponent, but the startup to the attack is so slow that anyone with a decent reaction time could easily dodge it, or just block it and counterattack you while you're still in recovery. The only way the heavy blow can hit your opponent is if they're standing completely still, which would never happen against a human player. A simple fix to the system would have been to allow the attack to guard break opponents and give players a little bit of armor while using it, which is how most fighting games handle heavy attacks. Another attack that I can't justify is one that only happens when your opponent is on the ground. It's never a good idea to use this move because it does too little damage and doesn't allow for follow-ups. Any decent player would just charge their chakra while their opponent is on the ground. Unique to this game is the ability to throw your opponent towards the wall and continue combat from there. While this is a cool feature and a nice reference to the anime, it doesn't add anything to the gameplay. Wall combat is the same as ground combat. There is no difference. I don't see any advantage to throwing your opponent against the wall. And after a few seconds of fighting, you'll eventually just return to the ground like nothing happened. One feature that I will miss is jutsu clashes. When certain jutsus are used at the same time, it will trigger a clash in which both players have to mash buttons to win. So for example, if the Rasengan is used against the Chidori, this will trigger a clash, and whoever wins that clash will not receive damage. Unfortunately, this feature never makes a return in the sequels. I'm assuming it's because it would have been difficult to balance it in a game with a huge roster, since you would have to account for dozens of different jutsus. Another cut feature is the short minigame that triggers before the start of an ultimate jutsu. If the defending player wins the minigame, they won't receive the full amount of damage. I enjoy this feature because it allows players getting hit with an ultimate jutsu a second chance, especially since ultimate jutsus do serious damage in this game. Speaking of ultimates, Storm 1 has the best ultimate jutsus in the series. That's because all the ultimates are visually distinct and they're not over in 5 seconds like the ones in Storm 2, but because of how long they are, you do eventually get tired of seeing them over and over again, especially when you keep in mind about how small the roster is. And as stated before, awakened characters also feature their own unique ultimate jutsu. I also appreciate how the different ultimate jutsus do different levels of damage, which means stronger techniques like the Hidden Lotus would do much more damage than something like the Chidori. This is different in future installments, where an attack like Planetary Devastation would do a similar amount of damage as the Rasengan. As mentioned previously, some awakenings give characters completely different movesets, but to the characters that don't change their movesets when they awaken, they instead receive other benefits. While this doesn't apply to all the characters in the roster, some examples are Kabuto, whose awakening grants him regenerating health since he's a medical ninja. Itachi's awakening makes it that anyone who gets near him suffers from slowdown. Sasuke's and Kakashi's awakening allows them to substitute better using their Sharingans. While these bonuses aren't as good as receiving an entire moveset, they are still nice to have, and it's unfortunate that the sequels removed this feature and just made it that the awakenings give you a stat boost instead. The biggest gripe I do have with the gameplay is how substitutions are handled. Instead of substitutions having their own dedicated bar, the chakra bar is used instead, which means a lot of the gameplay focuses on making sure you're always charging your chakra. The substitutions themselves are tricky to pull off. For example, your character doesn't always substitute when the button is pressed. It's unknown whether substitutions are based on timing or just mashing the button and praying that your character decides to substitute. In future games, substitution is very easy, and sometimes you can even substitute before their attack even lands, which means this is a problem with Storm 1 and not Storm 4. I'm not the only one experiencing this problem. If you were to search up Storm 1 substitutions, you'll find many players complaining on how difficult substitutions are to pull off. This problem becomes greater when you realize that substitution is your only option to get out of an enemy's combos besides using supports. But aside from the substitutions and the game itself lacking complexity, the combat in Ninja Storm 1 does serve its purpose as a casual anime arena fighter, and it lays the foundation for sequels to improve upon it. The story in Ninja Storm 1 is very hit or miss. Some story moments are depicted very faithfully with cinematic cutscenes that mirror the quality of the anime, and you could tell that they go through a lot of effort to reach the same levels of quality as the show, while other story moments are just depicted through text boxes and generic battles, which makes the story mode itself feel very uneven. In some moments, you're fighting a boss battle with quick time events and cinematics, and other times you're just going through the same minigames over and over again, while having random battles in between them that feature very little story elements. The worst crime this story mode commits is skipping the Land of the Waves arc that featured Sabusa and Haku. It's a strange decision to skip the first major story arc of the Naruto series. Choices like these make the story mode feel unfinished, like the developers were forced to complete what was already in progress and just skimp on everything else to meet the deadline. As mentioned before, the story mode does have a few mini games in between the fight. These mini games are tree climb, tree jumping, and hide and seek. They're not very complex mini games, but they do give you a good break from the fights. The real problem with the mini games is that the story mode forces you to do them several times in order to proceed. Doing these mini games once or twice is good enough. After a while, you start to get tired of them. You also have to participate in on-story battles, otherwise you'll be blocked from progressing the story. It wouldn't surprise me if all this padding was just added, but the story mode wouldn't be 3 hours long. Outside of battles, you can actually explore the Hidden Leaf Village as Naruto. You can't interact with the village that much, and your main purpose of exploring is just to collect scrolls, which even that gets tiring after a while. But I do appreciate how they went out of their way to allow you to freely explore the village. You can throw kunais, launch yourself with the Naruto cannon, and run up walls. It might not sound like much, but it's a lot better movement system than in the sequels, which just has you following a linear path. One way you could tell if an anime video game has a good story or not is if non-anime watchers can still get the major plot points, and this doesn't apply to Ninja Storm 1. Those who are unaware of the Naruto story will be completely lost in this game. The story of Ninja Storm 1 serves better as a refresher rather than a first introduction. Storm 1 is still a decent fighting game, but it hasn't aged well because the sequels improve on its shortcomings, which is why this game is difficult to recommend since a lot of the aspects are improved and done better in future installments. The only people you could really recommend this game to is Naruto fans who wish to play every Ninja Storm game. The gameplay won't attract the casual audience since the gameplay is better in Storm 4, and the story won't attract them either because they won't even understand what's going on. The best thing you could say about Storm 1 is that it only looks bad because Storm 4 exists. If Storm 1 was the only Ninja Storm game ever released, it will be seen as one of the best 3D Naruto fighting games. If for some reason you're still curious and wish to play the game, the best version of it is on Steam. It was given a re-release as a part of the Storm trilogy.